Hey guys, welcome back to another evening of historical disappointment. Tonight we're diving into the frosty nightmare of being a real Viking warrior. And no, this isn't the Hollywood version with perfectly braided beards, horned helmets, which were never a thing, and protein shake-fueled berserkers. We're diving into the real Viking experience. The blood, the frostbite, the questionable hygiene, and enough blistered feet to fill a sketchy medieval foot spa. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll be hugging your central heating and memory foam mattress like they're sacred relics from Valhalla. Before we embark on this Norse nightmare, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy these historical bedtime stories. And I'm curious, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little community spread across different time zones, some of you just waking up, while others are drifting off to sleep with these tales of historical discomfort. Now dim your lights, maybe wrap yourself in something warm. You'll appreciate that modern blanket more by the end of this. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hearth is lit, the mead is poured, or whatever you're sipping on, and the saga is about to unfold. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a coastal settlement somewhere in 9th century Scandinavia. The good news, you're alive and about to experience the legendary life of a Viking warrior. The bad news, you probably won't make it to sunset. Your modern sensibilities, physical conditioning, and general squeamishness about, well, everything are about to be tested beyond breaking point. Your eyes crack open to darkness. Not the gentle darkness of your blackout curtains, but the thick, smoky darkness of a longhouse where the only light filters through a small smoke hole in the roof. The air is dense with the aroma of last night's fire, unwashed bodies, and the distinct tang of dried fish hanging from the rafters. This isn't the cozy Viking aesthetic you've seen in design magazines. This is olfactory warfare, and your nostrils are losing the battle. Your bed isn't a bed at all. It's a wooden platform built into the wall, shared with whoever else lives in your section of the longhouse. Your mattress is a stuffed sack of straw that rustles with every movement, announcing to everyone that you're awake. Your pillow? A folded cloak that smells like a combination of sweat, sea salt, and something you desperately hope is just spilled mead. Your blanket is a scratchy wool affair that's been passed down through generations, each adding their own unique contribution to its bouquet of human existence. The temperature inside is whatever the temperature outside happens to be, minus the wind. In winter, that means your breath forms clouds in front of your face. In summer, it means you're marinating in your own sweat beneath that wool blanket. Climate control is a concept as foreign to these people as smartphones and dental floss. Speaking of which, your mouth tastes like something crawled in there and died during the night, which, considering the lack of oral hygiene, isn't entirely impossible. Your teeth feel fuzzy, your tongue is coated, and there's a dull ache in your back molar that you're desperately trying to ignore because dentistry in this era involves pliers and zero anesthesia. You try to stretch, but immediately bump into the person sleeping next to you. Maybe a family member, maybe just another warrior in your lord's service. Privacy isn't a concept that exists in Viking architecture. The longhouse is one large room divided by simple partitions, if you're lucky. More often, it's just an open hall where everyone sleeps, eats, works, and lives together in a symphony of snores, bodily functions, and constant chatter. As you lie there, contemplating how quickly you could sprint back to the 21st century, you hear the settlement stirring to life. There's work to be done, training to complete, maybe even a raid to prepare for, and you, with your soft hands and screen-strained eyes, are expected to keep up. Welcome to your first morning as a Viking warrior. The day has barely begun. and already your body is screaming for a hot shower, coffee, and the sweet embrace of modern plumbing. But those comforts are 1,000 years away. Right now, you need to figure out how to survive the next few hours without embarrassing yourself, injuring someone else, or becoming intimately acquainted with the business end of an axe. And trust me, it only gets more challenging from here. The morning routine alone would send most of us running for the time machine. So let's continue this journey together and see just how quickly your Viking career would come to an inglorious end. So you've managed to peel yourself off that wooden sleeping platform, your joints creaking like the timbers of a longship in rough seas. Now it's time to address that morning breath and empty your bladder. Prepare yourself. Viking hygiene practices are about to make you nostalgic for even the most questionable gas station bathroom. First things first, nature calls, and it's not being polite about it. In your modern life, this would involve a quick shuffle to your pristine porcelain throne, complete with scented candles and perhaps a forgotten smartphone. In Viking society, your options are considerably more rustic. If you're in a coastal settlement, you might be directed to the shoreline. That's right. The beach is your bathroom. The concept is simple. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, and with it, your contribution to local marine fertilization. Environmentally sustainable? Perhaps. Dignified? Absolutely not, especially when you realize this is a communal activity. Nothing builds warrior camaraderie quite like squatting near your shield brothers at dawn, making awkward eye contact while the brisk Nordic wind introduces itself to parts of your anatomy that have never known such cold. If you're inland or the weather is particularly foul, you might use a designated waste pit some distance from the longhouse. No toilet paper here. Your options include moss, leaves, smooth stones, or your left hand. Yes, your hand. This is why Vikings were particular about eating with their right hand only, and why you should be very careful about accepting food from anyone who seems confused about this custom. Some larger settlements might have a primitive latrine, essentially a bench with holes positioned over a pit. The smell is exactly what you're imagining, only worse, because it's combined with the general aroma of unwashed humanity that permeates everything in this era. There's no ventilation system beyond the occasional gust of wind, which is less refreshing and more like redistributing the odour in exciting new combinations. Now, about that morning breath. Forget minty freshness. That concept is centuries away. Some Vikings did practice a form of dental hygiene, but it's nothing like your electric toothbrush and whitening strips routine. The most conscientious warriors might use a frayed twig as a tooth cleaning implement, rubbing it against their teeth to remove the most obvious debris. Others might rinse with water, or, if they're particularly sophisticated, a mixture of water and herbs that does absolutely nothing for bacteria, but might temporarily mask the smell of decay. Your teeth, assuming you still have most of them, are already at a disadvantage. The Viking diet is abrasive. Coarse bread full of grit from stone-ground flour wears down enamel, while preserved meats and fish provide ample opportunity for food to lodge between teeth. Without proper cleaning, your mouth is essentially a thriving metropolis for bacteria, leading to infections, abscesses, and the kind of pain that makes battle wounds seem like a pleasant distraction. Speaking of pain, remember that aching molar you noticed upon waking? Better hope it resolves itself, because dental care in Viking society is primitive at best. If a tooth becomes too problematic, it might be pulled using iron pincers, without anesthesia beyond perhaps a strong drink of mead or ale. The procedure is performed by whoever has the strongest grip and steadiest hand, not by a trained professional. The concept of filling a cavity is as alien as the smartphone in your pocket that no longer exists. Now, let's address the elephant in the longhouse: bathing. Contrary to some historical misconceptions, Vikings were actually more hygienic than many of their European contemporaries. Archaeological evidence suggests they used primitive soaps made from animal fats and lye, combs for hair and beard grooming, and even ear spoons for removing wax. Saturday was even known as washing day in Norse culture. Lugadager, which evolved into lørdag in Swedish and lørdag in Danish and Norwegian. But before you celebrate this relative cleanliness, understand that more hygienic than medieval Europeans is clearing a bar so low it's practically underground. A weekly wash is still 6 days less frequent than your modern shower routine, and that bath isn't a steamy shower with exfoliating scrub and moisturizing body wash. It's a quick splash in a wooden tub or nearby stream, often using water cold enough to make your extremities retreat into your body like frightened turtles. In winter, bathing becomes even less appealing and therefore less frequent. The choice between smelling like a combination of sweat, smoke, and fish, or risking hypothermia in a frozen stream, is no choice at all for practical Vikings. They simply embrace the aroma as part of their fearsome warrior presence. Your hair and beard, which you almost certainly have if you're a male Viking, are another matter entirely. Long hair was common for both men and women, but it wasn't the flowing, shampoo commercial locks you might imagine. Without conditioner, detangler, or even a proper brush, your hair is a tangled nest that serves as both warmth for your head and convenient housing for lice. Yes, lice, your constant companions in this historical adventure. Vikings did use combs carved from bone or antler, and archaeological finds suggest they took pride in their hair and beard grooming. Elaborate braids and styles could indicate status or simply personal preference. But maintaining these styles without modern products means using animal fats or oils that, while effective at taming hair, add their own distinctive scent to your already aromatic presence. As for those lice, they're simply part of life. You might use a fine-toothed comb to remove the most obvious parasites, but complete eradication is impossible. The best you can hope for is management, not elimination. Your scalp itches constantly, a sensation you'll eventually learn to ignore, like the smell of fish or the sound of snoring from across the longhouse. By now, your modern sensibilities are screaming for a hot shower, toothpaste, and perhaps a lifetime supply of hand sanitizer. But you've only addressed the most basic morning necessities, and already you're longing for the comforts of modern plumbing. Unfortunately, your day as a Viking warrior has barely begun, and personal discomfort is the least of your concerns. With your bladder emptied and your mouth still tasting like something died in it, because microbiologically speaking, something probably did, it's time to face the next challenge: breaking your fast with a traditional Viking morning meal. Hope you're hungry, because refusing food in a culture where starvation was always just one bad harvest away is not an option. And let me tell you, breakfast in the 9th century is an adventure your pampered modern palate is woefully unprepared for. You've survived the morning hygiene gauntlet, or lack thereof, and now your stomach is growling like an angry wolf. Time for breakfast, Viking style. If you're expecting avocado toast, a smoothie bowl, or even a simple bowl of Cheerios, prepare for crushing disappointment. The first meal of your Viking day is about to redefine your relationship with the word breakfast. In your longhouse, the central hearth is already crackling to life, tended by whoever drew the short straw for morning fire duty. The smoke curls upward, some of it finding the smoke hole in the roof, the rest lazily dispersing throughout the communal space, stinging your eyes and flavouring everything with its woody essence. This isn't a quaint fireplace with a proper chimney. It's an open fire pit that serves as the settlement's primary cooking, heating, and social hub. Your breakfast options depend largely on the season, your status, and how successful yesterday's hunting or fishing expedition was. But let's be realistic. You're not getting pancakes with maple syrup or a fluffy omelette with artisanal cheese. The Viking breakfast is utilitarian, designed to fuel your body for a day of physical labor, not to delight your taste buds or photograph well for social media. The most common breakfast staple is porridge, but forget the creamy, Instagram-worthy oatmeal topped with berries and honey you might make at home. Viking porridge is a thick, gloppy mixture of whatever grain is available, usually barley or rye, sometimes oats if you're lucky. It's cooked in a large iron pot over the fire, stirred with a wooden spoon that's seen better days, and seasoned with, well, nothing. Salt exists, but it's valuable, used sparingly for preserving food rather than enhancing flavor. The texture is inconsistent, sometimes smooth, often lumpy, occasionally containing the surprise crunch of an errant grain husk that escaped the grinding stone. This porridge might be served with a dollop of sour milk, not to be confused with the carefully cultured Greek yogurt in your modern refrigerator. This is milk that's been left to sour naturally, developing a tangy flavour and thicker consistency. To your 21st century palate, it tastes like someone left the dairy out for 3 days too long, because that's exactly what happened. In a world without refrigeration, this controlled spoilage is a practical way to extend the usability of milk. If your settlement is prosperous or it's a special occasion, you might see bread accompanying your porridge, but Viking bread bears little resemblance to the soft, pillowy loaves you're accustomed to. It's flat, dense, and hard enough to serve as an emergency weapon. Made from coarsely ground grain, often containing bits of millstone that flaked off during grinding, it's baked on hot stones or in simple clay ovens. The result is a tough disc that requires serious jaw strength and determination to chew. Your modern teeth, weakened by a lifetime of processed foods, are already protesting at the mere sight of it. To wash down this challenging meal, you won't be sipping a freshly brewed cappuccino or cold-pressed juice. Your morning beverage is most likely ale. Yes, ale at breakfast. Before you get excited about starting your day with a buzz, understand that this isn't the high-alcohol craft beer of your local brewery. Morning ale is small beer, low in alcohol content, but importantly, safer to drink than water from questionable sources. It's cloudy room temperature, which in a Viking longhouse in winter means cold, and has a sour, yeasty flavour that takes considerable getting used to. Water is available but approached with caution. Vikings weren't ignorant. They understood that some water sources were safer than others, preferring running springs to stagnant ponds. But giardia and other waterborne illnesses don't announce their presence, so fermented beverages were often the safer choice. If you do drink water, it comes in a wooden cup or horn that's been used by countless others before you, developing a patina of use that no amount of rinsing will remove. If you're fortunate enough to be breaking your fast during fishing or hunting season, protein might make an appearance on your morning menu. This could be dried fish, usually cod or herring that's been preserved by salting and drying until it achieves the texture of cardboard, and a smell that permeates everything within a 10-foot radius. You might need to soften it by soaking or pounding before it's edible, and even then, edible is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Alternatively, you might be offered some preserved meat, most likely pork that's been salted, smoked, or simply dried. Without refrigeration, fresh meat is a luxury reserved for the days immediately following a successful hunt. The rest of the time, you're eating meat that's been preserved using methods that prioritize not dying of food poisoning over culinary enjoyment. Eggs make a seasonal appearance when birds are laying, collected from domestic fowl or foraged from wild nests. They're typically boiled, simple and practical, though the concept of soft-boiled versus hard-boiled is more accident than intention. The shells are thicker and more varied than the uniform white eggs in your supermarket carton, and the yolks are deeply coloured from the bird's varied diet. Honey is the Viking equivalent of sugar, precious, used sparingly, and considered a treat rather than an everyday staple. If you're particularly favoured or it's a special occasion, a drizzle might find its way into your porridge or ale, transforming the mundane into something approaching pleasant. But don't count on this luxury for your everyday breakfast. Fruit and nuts appear when in season, berries in summer, nuts in fall, but there's no year-round supply of bananas or almonds shipped from warmer climates. The concept of seasonal eating isn't a trendy choice, but an inescapable reality. When blueberries ripen in the forest, you feast on blueberries. When they're gone until next year. As you sit on a wooden bench, hunched over your bowl of greyish porridge, trying not to think about the dubious hygiene of the communal cooking pot or the weevils that might have inhabited the grain before grinding, you realise something profound. Breakfast in the Viking Age isn't a culinary experience, it's survival fuel. There's no presentation, no concern for balanced flavours or textural contrasts. It's about getting calories into your body efficiently before a day of physical exertion that would break most modern humans. And here's the truly humbling part. Despite what your pampered modern palate perceives as bland, borderline, inedible fare, you're actually experiencing a relatively good meal by the standards of the time. Many people throughout the medieval world would consider your porridge and ale a feast. The Vikings, with their fishing skills and trading networks, often ate better than their contemporaries in other parts of Europe. So you force down another spoonful of gluey porridge, tear off a chunk of dental destruction bread with your teeth, and wash it all down with a swig of sour ale. Your stomach, accustomed to carefully balanced macronutrients and pasteurized everything, gurgles in confused protest. But there's no time to coddle your digestive system. The morning meal is done, and now it's time to dress for your day as a Viking warrior. And if you thought breakfast was challenging, wait until you try squeezing your soft modern body into the practical but profoundly uncomfortable clothing of a 9th century Norseman. With your stomach now containing a mixture of gritty porridge and sour ale, it's time to get dressed for your day of Viking warrior activities. If you're picturing yourself in a horned helmet and gleaming armour, prepare for yet another historical reality check. Viking clothing was practical, layered, and, to your modern sensibilities, about as comfortable as wearing burlap sacks stitched together with fishing line. Let's start with the basics, your undergarments. For men, this means a linen tunic called a kirtle that hangs to mid-thigh or knee. It's not the soft, pre-shrunk, perfectly sized undershirt from your dresser drawer. This is hand-spun, hand-woven linen, coarser than you're used to, and with all the irregularities that come from human craftsmanship rather than industrial precision. The weave is loose enough to let air circulate, but tight enough to provide some warmth. It's the colour of unbleached fabric, an off-white that will never see the inside of a washing machine and therefore will never truly be white again after the first week of wear. Women wear a similar undertunic, though longer, reaching to the ankles. Over this, they don a pinafore-style dress called a hangarock, suspended by two strap brooches at the shoulders. These brooches aren't just decorative, they're functional fasteners and often indicate the wearer's social status through their material and craftsmanship. But since we're focusing on your day as a warrior, let's continue with the male Viking outfit. Over your kirtle, you'll wear trousers, not the tailored, comfortable pants you're accustomed to, but loose-fitting wool trousers that taper at the ankle or are bound with leg wrappings. These trousers are held up by a drawstring or a belt, with no elastic waistband in sight. The wool is scratchy against your skin, especially where it makes contact with your thighs and other sensitive areas. Hope you're not allergic to wool, because antihistamines won't be invented for another 1,000 years or so. Those leg wrappings, by the way, are strips of wool wound around your lower legs from ankle to knee, similar to puttees worn by soldiers in later centuries. They're secured with ties or small garters and serve to protect your legs from brush and brambles while keeping your trouser legs from catching on things during battle or work. They're practical but require constant adjustment throughout the day as they inevitably loosen with movement. Now for your footwear. Forget cushioned insoles, arch support or waterproof Gore-Tex. Viking shoes are simple leather affairs, basically a single piece of cowhide or goat skin cut in a specific pattern, gathered around your foot and stitched together. They're secured with leather thongs tied around the ankle. There's no left or right shoe. They're identical and will only conform to your feet after weeks of wear, during which they'll be consistently uncomfortable. They offer minimal protection from sharp rocks, practically no insulation in cold weather, and become slippery death traps on wet surfaces. They also leak, stretch when wet, and shrink when dried too quickly near a fire, potentially leaving you with shoes that no longer fit after a rainy day. In colder weather, you'll add more layers. Another tunic, this time made of wool, over your linen one. This outer tunic might be dyed using natural pigments from plants, insects or minerals, resulting in muted colours like rust red, mustard yellow, moss green, or a blue derived from woad that's nothing like the vibrant hues of your modern wardrobe. The dyes fade with exposure to sun and infrequent washing, creating a perpetually faded, patchy appearance that modern fashion designers would charge premium prices to replicate. For additional warmth, you might wear a cloak, a simple rectangle of heavy wool fastened at one shoulder with a brooch or pin. It's essentially a wearable blanket, practical but cumbersome, especially when you're trying to use both hands for, say, swinging an axe or rowing a ship. It catches on everything, gets sodden in the rain, and adds considerable weight to your already uncomfortable ensemble. Speaking of weight, let's talk about your warrior gear. Your main protection isn't plate armor or even chain mail. Those were expensive and relatively rare. Most Viking warriors relied on a thick, padded jacket called a gambeson, sometimes reinforced with small metal plates or rings sewn into the fabric. It's heavy, hot, and about as breathable as a plastic bag. Within minutes of physical exertion, you're sweating profusely underneath, creating a personal sauna that you'll marinate in all day. Some wealthy or successful warriors might own a byrnie, a shirt of interlocked iron rings, what we commonly call chainmail. If you're fortunate enough to have one, congratulations. You now get to carry an additional 20 to 30 pounds of metal on your upper body. Every movement becomes a workout, and the weight distribution ensures that your shoulders and back will be screaming for mercy by midday. The rings chafe against your tunic, sometimes catching the fabric or pinching skin. They also conduct temperature extremely efficiently, becoming searing hot in summer sun and bone-chillingly cold in winter. On your head you wear not a horned helmet. That's a 19th century operatic invention with no basis in historical reality. Viking helmets were simple, conical, or rounded affairs made of iron, often with a nose guard but no face protection. Many warriors couldn't afford even this basic protection and went into battle with only a leather cap or nothing at all protecting their skulls. Your helmet, if you have one, is heavy, shifts with movement, limits your peripheral vision, and rings like a bell if struck, right next to your ears, which is as disorienting as it is painful. Your primary defense is your shield, a round wooden board about 1 meter in diameter, rimmed with iron and featuring a central metal boss that protects your hand grip. It weighs between 10 to 15 pounds and must be actively held throughout combat. There's no convenient strap to sling it on your back when not in use. After carrying it for an hour, your arm feels like it's being slowly pulled from its socket. After a day, you question whether having a left arm is really worth the agony. For weapons, you might carry a spear, the most common Viking weapon due to its relative affordability and effectiveness. It's essentially a sharp metal point on a wooden shaft, simple but deadly in trained hands. Alternatively, or additionally, you might have an axe, not the massive, ornate battle axes of fantasy illustrations, but a practical tool that serves for both combat and camp chores. Swords were expensive status symbols owned only by the wealthy or exceptionally successful raiders. If you have one, it's a simple, straight-bladed weapon, lacking the elaborate guards and pommels of later medieval swords. All of these weapons have one thing in common: they're heavy, especially to your modern arms that are more accustomed to lifting smartphones than steel. The balance is different from anything you've handled before, making them unwieldy and dangerous to yourself as much as to any enemy. Let's not forget accessories, the finishing touches to your Viking ensemble. A belt of leather or tablet-woven wool holds your tunic in place and provides a place to hang your eating knife, pouch for personal items, and perhaps a fire-starting kit. Men might wear arm rings or neck rings if they've received them as gifts from their lord, visible symbols of loyalty and status. Women's jewellery is more elaborate, with brooches, beaded necklaces, and sometimes finger rings indicating their family's prosperity. As you finish dressing, adjusting uncomfortable layers, and trying to make peace with the fact that everything itches, you catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished metal mirror. Another luxury item, if you're fortunate enough to have access to one. The person staring back bears little resemblance to the fierce, majestic Vikings of your imagination. You look bulky, dishevelled, and vaguely miserable. Your hair, unwashed and untamed, sticks out at odd angles from beneath your head covering. Your beard, if you've been here long enough to grow one, is a patchy mess without the benefit of specialized oils and balms, but appearance is the least of your concerns. You're now effectively wearing your house. All your layers, weapons, and gear represent a significant portion of your worldly possessions. There's no closet full of options, no changing into something more comfortable when you get home. This outfit, with minor seasonal adjustments, is your constant companion. And now that you're dressed, sweating, itching, and already exhausted from the simple act of putting on clothes, it's time to begin your actual duties as a Viking warrior. The physical training, ship maintenance, and combat drills that await will make getting dressed seem like a pleasant warm-up exercise. Your modern body, accustomed to ergonomic chairs and climate-controlled environments, is about to discover new definitions of discomfort and exertion. And we're still only in the first few hours of your Viking day. Now that you're dressed in your historically accurate but thoroughly uncomfortable Viking attire, it's time to begin your morning duties. The sun has barely cleared the horizon, and already the settlement is humming with activity. Unlike your modern morning routine of checking emails while sipping coffee, Viking mornings are a flurry of essential tasks that keep the community functioning and prepare warriors for the day ahead. As you step outside the longhouse, the cool morning air hits your face, perhaps the only refreshing moment you'll experience today. The settlement is already alive with activity. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Livestock vocalize their morning complaints, and your fellow Vikings move with purpose, each attending to their designated responsibilities. There's no easing into the day here. Survival demands immediate action. Your first duty depends somewhat on your status within the community. Viking society, while less rigidly hierarchical than later medieval structures, still operated on clear social distinctions. At the top sat the Jarl, chieftain or earl, followed by carls, free peasants including warriors, and at the bottom thralls, slaves, often captured during raids. Your experience varies dramatically depending on where you fall in this hierarchy. If you're a thrall, and let's hope you're not, your morning begins with the most back-breaking, unpleasant tasks. Feeding animals, mucking out stables, hauling water, and emptying waste buckets all fall to you. You eat last, sleep in the worst spots, and own nothing beyond the clothes on your back. Your life expectancy is short, your treatment harsh, and your chances of seeing your homeland again virtually non-existent. Modern concepts like workers' rights, minimum wage, or even basic human dignity don't apply to your situation. As a Carl, a free person and warrior, you have more autonomy, but no shortage of responsibilities. Your morning duties might begin with tending to your weapons and gear, that sword or axe you're so proud of. It needs constant maintenance to prevent rust in the damp Nordic climate. You'll spend time oiling the blade, checking for damage, and sharpening the edge on a whetstone, a tedious process requiring patience and skill. One slip, and you might lose a finger, which is particularly inconvenient when you're expected to row or fight later. Your shield, that crucial piece of defensive equipment, needs regular attention too. The wooden boards warp with moisture, the leather grip becomes loose with use, and the iron rim develops rust spots that must be sanded away. The painted designs that identify you in battle fade and chip, requiring touch-ups. This isn't just vanity. In the chaos of combat, these visual markers help your comrades distinguish you from the enemy. If you own livestock, perhaps a few chickens, a goat, or if you're prosperous, a cow, they need immediate attention. Animals don't recognize days off or sleep in mornings. They're hungry, thirsty, and have produced various substances overnight that need cleaning. Chickens require feed and protection from predators. Goats need milking and grazing supervision. Cows demand regular milking to prevent painful udder conditions. All produce manure that must be collected for use as fertilizer. Waste not, want not in a subsistence economy. Water, that resource you took for granted in your modern life, now requires significant effort to obtain. The settlement well or nearby stream isn't equipped with pumps or faucets. You'll join the morning water-gathering party, carrying wooden buckets to the source and back. A full water bucket weighs about 20 pounds, and you'll need several trips to supply your household's needs for drinking, cooking, and minimal washing. The path is muddy, the buckets leak, and by the time you return, you've spilled enough to necessitate another trip. Firewood presents another constant concern. The hearth fire ideally burns continuously, as starting a new fire with flint and steel, or worse, a friction fire drill, is time-consuming and frustrating. Morning duties often include gathering more fuel for the day's cooking and heating needs. In settled areas, nearby forests have already been heavily harvested, meaning longer walks to find suitable wood. And remember, taking wood from the wrong forest could be considered theft, punishable by fines or worse. If you're part of a warrior band preparing for a raid or expedition, your morning might include group training exercises. These aren't the carefully structured, safety-conscious workouts of your local gym. Viking combat training is practical, brutal, and occasionally lethal even when not intended to be. You'll practice shield formations, weapon techniques, and build the stamina needed for battle through wrestling, stone lifting, and other strength competitions. The training weapons aren't the padded, safety-tipped versions used in modern martial arts. They're typically the same weapons you'll use in actual combat, perhaps blunted slightly, but still capable of causing serious injury. Broken bones, concussions, and deep bruises are common training outcomes, accepted as necessary preparation for the realities of battle. Your modern understanding of proper workout recovery, protein shakes, and gradual progression has no place here. For women in the settlement, morning duties follow somewhat different patterns, though with no less intensity. While archaeological evidence suggests some women did participate in combat and raids, most focused on the complex domestic tasks that kept the community functioning. These weren't simple housekeeping chores, but essential survival skills requiring years to master. Food preservation occupies significant time. Smoking meat, drying fish, making cheese from milk before it spoils, brewing ale, and preparing stores for winter. Textile production is another critical female domain, transforming raw wool or flax into usable fabric through spinning, weaving, and sewing. Without these skills, the community would quite literally go naked and hungry. Children aren't exempt from morning duties either. From as young as 5 or 6, they're assigned age-appropriate tasks. Gathering eggs, scaring birds from crops, watching younger siblings, or learning crafts through apprenticeship. The concept of childhood as a protected time of play and education is largely foreign. Children are small adults with corresponding responsibilities. Their labor a necessary contribution to family survival. As the morning progresses, you notice something missing from your usual routine. There's no break, no coffee pause, no checking social media, no quick chat with colleagues by the water cooler. Work flows continuously from one task to the next, the rhythm dictated by necessity rather than clocks. Time is measured broadly by the sun's position and the community's needs, not by arbitrary 15-minute increments. You also realize that most tasks are communal rather than individual. The modern isolation of nuclear families handling their own separate households doesn't exist here. Food preparation, childcare, craft production, and training all happen in shared spaces with multiple people working together. Privacy is minimal, but so is loneliness. Every action you take is witnessed, judged, and commented upon by others. A social transparency that feels invasive to your modern sensibilities. By mid-morning, your back aches from unfamiliar labor, your hands sport new blisters from tools designed for function rather than comfort, and your stomach is already growling again despite breakfast. The physical demands of basic Viking life have already pushed your desk job body to its limits, and you haven't even faced any actual dangers yet. Speaking of dangers, your morning duties include constant vigilance. Viking settlements, particularly coastal ones, lived with the awareness that the same raiding tactics they employed against others could be turned against them. Lookouts are posted, weapons kept close at hand, and escape plans understood by all. The peaceful morning could transform into a fight for survival with little warning. As you struggle through these morning tasks, trying to ignore your complaining muscles and growing fatigue, you notice the Vikings around you showing no signs of similar distress. Children half your size carry loads that leave you winded. Elderly women with gnarled hands work twice as fast at tasks that leave you frustrated and confused. The physical conditioning that comes from a lifetime of manual labor has prepared them for this daily routine in ways your modern lifestyle simply cannot match. And here's the sobering realization. You've only made it through the morning duties. The real challenges of Viking life, the ones that involve blood, seawater, and genuine mortal peril, haven't even begun. As the settlement transitions from morning chores to the day's main activities, you're already exhausted, uncomfortable, and questioning your survival prospects. The warrior training that comes next will make these morning duties seem like a gentle warm-up exercise, and you thought your modern morning commute was challenging. With the morning duties behind you, it's time for the main event, warrior training. This isn't an optional CrossFit class you can skip when you're feeling lazy. This is the essential preparation that might determine whether you live to see tomorrow's sunrise or end up feeding the ravens on a foreign shore. And if you thought the morning chores were physically demanding, you're about to discover new definitions of exhaustion, pain, and what was I thinking coming to the 9th century. The training ground is typically a cleared area near the settlement. No fancy gymnasium with sprung floors and air conditioning. Just packed dirt, perhaps dusted with a layer of sand if you're fortunate, or muddy and slick if you're not. The weather conditions are irrelevant. Training happens in driving rain, howling wind, or under the merciless summer sun. Vikings don't cancel outdoor activities for a little precipitation or hypothermia risk. Your training begins with basic conditioning. Modern fitness enthusiasts might recognize some elements, running, wrestling, and strength training, but would be horrified by the complete absence of proper warm-ups, cool-downs, or any concern for joint health and injury prevention. The Viking approach to physical training is brutally pragmatic. If you can't handle training conditions, you certainly won't survive battle conditions. Running isn't measured in precise kilometers or timed splits. Instead, you might be told to run to a distant landmark and back, regardless of terrain. This could mean slogging through marshland, scrambling up rocky hillsides, or navigating dense forest, all while wearing your everyday clothing, not moisture-wicking performance fabrics. Your leather shoes, already uncomfortable, now collect water, mud, and small stones that transform each step into a special kind of torment. Strength training doesn't involve carefully calibrated weight machines or barbells with precise increments. Instead, you'll lift stones, logs, or other warriors. One popular Viking strength competition involved lifting increasingly heavy stones to different heights, from knee to waist to shoulder to overhead. These stones aren't uniformly shaped or balanced. They're awkward, rough, and designed by nature to be as uncooperative as possible. Another favourite is the log carry, where you hoist a tree trunk onto your shoulders and walk a designated distance. The log is unevenly weighted, covered in bark that scrapes your skin raw, and possibly home to various insects that object to being relocated. Your modern gym's carefully sanitized equipment seems laughably luxurious in comparison. Wrestling forms a cornerstone of Viking combat training. This isn't the regulated sport you might have seen in high school or the Olympics. Viking wrestling, glima in Old Norse, has fewer rules and more immediate consequences for failure. The basic objective is to throw your opponent to the ground, but the techniques allowed are considerably more varied and brutal than in modern wrestling. Trips, throws, and joint locks that would be illegal in contemporary competition are standard practice. Your training partners aren't concerned with your beginner status or the fact that your modern body has never experienced this kind of physical contact. They execute throws that send you crashing to the ground with bone-jarring force. The packed earth offers minimal cushioning, and each fall knocks the wind from your lungs and adds new bruises to your growing collection. Getting up becomes progressively more difficult, but remaining down only invites mockery or worse, being deemed unfit for warrior status. After conditioning comes weapons training. If you've never held a weapon before, and most modern people haven't, you're starting from a position of dangerous ignorance. The weight, balance, and proper use of Viking weapons require years of practice to master. You have hours at best. Spear training might come first, as the spear was the most common Viking weapon. The basic concept seems simple: point the sharp end at the enemy and thrust. But effective spear fighting involves footwork, timing, and technique that feel utterly foreign to your modern muscle memory. The shaft, typically ash or pine, is heavier than expected and vibrates jarringly in your hands when you thrust it into a practice target. Your arms tire quickly, your aim is inconsistent, and the more experienced warriors make no effort to hide their amusement at your clumsy attempts. Axe training presents different challenges. The weight distribution of a Viking axe, heavier toward the head, makes it unwieldy for the uninitiated. Each swing threatens to pull you off balance. The technique for effective strikes isn't the wild overhead chop depicted in movies, but a more controlled, precise movement that requires wrist strength you simply don't possess. Your practice swings either miss entirely or become embedded in the target, requiring embarrassing struggles to free the blade while your peers watch with thinly veiled contempt. If you're fortunate, or unfortunate, enough to train with a sword, you quickly discover that these aren't the perfectly balanced, lightweight weapons of fantasy films. A Viking sword is a substantial piece of iron, weighing between 2 to 4 pounds. This doesn't sound heavy until you're trying to control it through complex movements for more than a few minutes. Your forearm burns, your shoulder aches, and your grip weakens dangerously. A real sword is trying to escape your control with every swing, and when it does, it's likely to injure you or a bystander. The most humbling aspect of weapons training is realizing that children half your age handle these implements with greater skill and endurance than you can muster. They've been training since they could walk, their bodies and minds developing around these movements that feel so alien to you. A 12-year-old Viking youth can outfight most modern adults simply through familiarity with weapons and comfort with violence. A sobering thought for anyone who imagines they'd naturally excel in historical combat scenarios. Shield training might be the most physically demanding element of all. Your shield, that seemingly simple wooden disc, is actually a sophisticated piece of defensive equipment that requires technique and strength to use effectively. Held at arm's length, its 10 to 15 pounds becomes exponentially more taxing with each passing minute. Your shoulder screams, your forearm trembles, and still you must position it correctly to block incoming strikes. Those strikes, even in training, come with surprising force. When a practice weapon hits your shield, the impact travels through the wood and into your arm with bone-rattling intensity. After a dozen such impacts, your entire left side feels numb and simultaneously on fire. The shield rim bites into your forearm, leaving bruises in perfect circular patterns that will become familiar badges of a warrior's training. Formation training adds another layer of complexity. Vikings didn't just fight as individuals, but employed shield walls and other tactical formations that required coordination and discipline. You must learn to stand shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, shields overlapping to create a continuous barrier, while still being able to strike with your weapon through gaps in the wall. The physical proximity is uncomfortable. You can smell your neighbor's breath, feel their sweat-soaked clothing press against yours, hear their grunts of exertion inches from your ear. Moving in formation requires a synchronization that feels impossible to achieve. Step too quickly and you break the wall. Too slowly and you create dangerous gaps. The weight of your shield, the press of bodies around you, and the need to maintain awareness of commands and threats from multiple directions overwhelm your modern brain, accustomed to focusing on one screen at a time. Throughout training, there's no water break, no energy gel, no supportive coach offering technique adjustments and encouragement. Instruction comes in the form of demonstration, terse correction, and occasionally a painful rap with a practice weapon to highlight your mistakes. The pedagogy is simple: fail, suffer, improve, or continue suffering. Your modern expectation of positive reinforcement and graduated challenges has no place here. The psychological aspects of warrior training are perhaps even more challenging than the physical ones. You're being prepared not just to fight, but to kill, a reality that most modern people have been carefully insulated from. Viking combat wasn't about scoring points or demonstrating superior technique. It was about ending another human's life before they could end yours. This mental conditioning happens through constant exposure to controlled violence, gradually desensitizing you to actions that your modern upbringing has taught you to find abhorrent. Mock battles form the culmination of daily training, putting all elements together in chaotic, adrenaline-fueled scenarios that approximate real combat conditions. These aren't carefully choreographed stage fights, but barely controlled chaos. Injuries are common: split lips, broken fingers, cracked ribs, all considered acceptable training outcomes and valuable lessons. Your modern concept of workplace safety would be laughed out of the settlement. By the time training concludes for the morning, you're a walking inventory of pain. Muscles you didn't know existed announce their presence through searing protest. Your hands are blistered from weapon handles, your shield arm hangs uselessly at your side, and various new bruises bloom across your body like a macabre garden. Your throat is raw from exertion in the cold air, your lungs burn, and your heart hammers against your ribs as though seeking escape from this historical nightmare. The Vikings around you, meanwhile, seem barely winded. They laugh, critique each other's performance, and casually discuss technique improvements while your vision swims and you fight the urge to collapse. Their bodies, conditioned by a lifetime of physical labor and regular training, process the exertion as routine. Your body, shaped by ergonomic chairs and climate-controlled environments, registers it as a near-death experience. And here's the truly terrifying part: this was just practice. Controlled, somewhat restrained practice among people who generally don't want to kill you. Actual combat would be exponentially more intense, with real weapons, genuine lethal intent, and none of the limited safety considerations of the training ground. If the morning's training has left you broken and exhausted, how could you possibly survive an actual raid or battle? The answer is simple: you wouldn't. Your modern body and mind, despite whatever fitness routine you might follow in the 21st century, are fundamentally unprepared for the realities of Viking combat. The gap between contemporary physical conditioning, even among serious athletes, and the hardened, battle-ready physique of a 9th century warrior is virtually unbridgeable without years of specific preparation. As you limp away from the training ground, every step a negotiation with pain, you realize you've only made it through the morning of your Viking day. The afternoon might bring actual raiding, seafaring in open vessels, or other activities that make training seem like a gentle warm-up exercise. And you, modern time traveler, are already wondering if you could fake your own death just to escape the afternoon's challenges. Unfortunately, that's not an option. The day is young, and your Viking ordeal is just beginning. You've somehow survived the morning training session, your body a catalogue of new pains and your pride thoroughly shattered. But the Viking day marches on without mercy, and now it's time to face one of the most iconic and terrifying aspects of Norse life: seafaring. The very word Viking conjures images of sleek longships cutting through frigid waters, their dragon-headed prows striking fear into coastal communities. Romantic, adventurous, glorious, at least until you actually step aboard one. The Viking longship represents one of the most remarkable maritime innovations of the early medieval period. These vessels allowed Scandinavians to project power across unprecedented distances, from the shores of North America to the rivers of Russia and the Mediterranean coast. They were technological marvels of their time, and absolute nightmares for modern comfort expectations. Your first glimpse of the ship might momentarily rekindle your enthusiasm. The graceful lines, the carved prow, the rows of shields hung along the gunnels. It looks like something from a museum exhibit or fantasy film. That fleeting appreciation evaporates the moment you're expected to board and take your place among the crew. Let's start with the basic design. The typical Viking longship is an open vessel. Yes, completely open to the elements. There's no below-deck cabin, no cosy captain's quarters, not even a basic roof. Rain, snow, sea spray, and blistering sun all have direct access to you throughout your journey. The only protection might be a woolen tent erected when anchored, but while sailing, you're fully exposed to whatever meteorological punishment the North Sea decides to inflict. The ship itself is clinker built, meaning the hull planks overlap like clapboard siding on a house. This creates a flexible vessel that can ride rough seas effectively, but also results in a constantly shifting, creaking structure that never feels quite solid beneath your feet. Every wave sends vibrations through the entire ship, a sensation particularly unsettling to modern people accustomed to the relative stability of large contemporary vessels or the absolute solidity of land. Your seat is a wooden chest containing your personal belongings, doubling as storage and rowing bench. The wood is hard, unpadded, and shaped with function rather than ergonomics in mind. After the first hour, your modern posterior, accustomed to cushioned office chairs and memory foam, is screaming in protest. After a full day, you've lost all sensation in your lower body, which might be a blessing considering the pain that preceded the numbness. Speaking of rowing, that's your primary job on board. Viking ships did use sails when wind conditions were favourable, but rowing was essential for manoeuvring near shore during calm weather or when travelling against the wind. The oars are massive wooden implements, each requiring significant strength just to extend over the side of the ship, let alone pull through water. The rowing technique isn't particularly complex, but the physical demands are extraordinary. Each stroke requires your full body, legs bracing, core engaged, back and shoulders pulling, arms guiding. Modern rowing machines at the gym provide adjustable resistance and perfect balance. Viking oars offer whatever resistance the sea decides to give, sometimes pulling through water like molasses, other times slipping ineffectively when you least expect it. Coordination is crucial. You must match your rowing rhythm precisely with the others in your row, who must in turn match the entire ship. One misplaced oar can disrupt the entire vessel's momentum, or worse, collide with another oar, snapping one or both, and possibly injuring the rowers. The pace is set by chants or drum beats, creating a hypnotic rhythm that your burning muscles beg you to break, but social pressure forces you to maintain. After just 30 minutes of rowing, your hands develop blisters that break and bleed. Vikings developed protective calluses over years of such work. You have no such advantage. Your modern palms, more accustomed to swiping touch screens than gripping wooden oars, are woefully unprepared for this friction. By the end of your first rowing shift, your hands look like raw meat, each new grip on the oar a fresh exercise in agony. Your back, already strained from morning training, now enters new realms of pain. The constant forward and back motion, always under load, targets muscle groups that your occasional gym visits never adequately prepared. Even the most dedicated modern fitness enthusiast would find Viking rowing a uniquely punishing experience, as it combines cardiovascular demands with relentless resistance training, all while balancing on a moving platform. When you're not rowing, you're bailing. Viking ships, for all their innovative design, leak constantly. The overlapping planks that allow the hull to flex also create seams where water inevitably seeps in. Someone must continuously scoop this water out using wooden bailing buckets, a tedious back-breaking task that never actually ends, just occasionally becomes less urgent. Navigation presents another shock to your modern sensibilities. There's no GPS, no radar, not even a magnetic compass, which wouldn't become common in European seafaring until centuries later. Viking navigators relied on an intimate knowledge of coastlines, the position of the sun and stars, the behavior of birds and marine life, and other environmental cues that are practically invisible to your untrained eye. In clear weather near familiar coasts, this system works remarkably well, but in fog, during storms, or in unfamiliar waters, the uncertainty would terrify anyone accustomed to modern navigational precision. The navigator might confidently steer by the sun's position, but a single day of heavy cloud cover can leave the ship effectively lost until celestial bodies become visible again. Weather forecasting follows similarly primitive methods. Vikings were skilled at reading natural signs, cloud formations, bird behavior, wind shifts, but these provide limited warning compared to modern meteorological technology. A storm can appear with minimal notice, transforming a challenging but manageable journey into a fight for survival within minutes. And those North Sea storms are nothing like the rain showers you dash through from your car to the office door. They're violent, sustained assaults of wind, water, and cold that test the limits of both vessels and crews. Waves crash over the sides, instantly drenching everyone and everything. The ship pitches at angles that convince your stomach the end is near. Rain and sea spray make it impossible to keep your eyes fully open, yet you must maintain your position and duties regardless. During such storms, the flexible design of the longship becomes both salvation and torture device. The vessel bends and twists with the waves rather than fighting against them, an effective survival strategy that feels like being inside a wooden serpent having a seizure. The constant, unpredictable movement makes it impossible to brace properly, leading to sailors being thrown against each other or ship components, resulting in bruises, cuts, and occasionally more serious injuries. Seasickness, that great equalizer, spares few first-time sailors. The relentless motion, combined with the smells of wet wool, unwashed bodies, fish, tar, and whatever food stores are on board, creates perfect conditions for nausea. There's no Dramamine, no pressure bands, no ginger ale to settle your stomach, just the miserable experience of vomiting over the side, while your crewmates either ignore you or mock your weakness, depending on their personal inclinations. The social environment aboard a Viking ship adds another layer of challenge. These vessels are cramped with minimal personal space. You're constantly within arm's reach of your crewmates, sharing their smells, sounds, and moods. Privacy doesn't exist. Every bodily function occurs in full view of others, requiring a level of social comfort with natural processes that modern Western norms have systematically eroded. Sleeping arrangements aboard are similarly communal and uncomfortable. When the ship anchors for the night, you might help erect a simple tent-like structure over a portion of the vessel, providing minimal protection from dew and light rain. Your bed is your sea chest, the deck, or occasionally the shore if the ship is beached. Your blanket is the same wool cloak you wear during the day, now damp with sea spray and sweat. Your pillow is whatever bundle of soft goods you can spare, or simply your folded arm. Sleep quality is poor at best. The ship never stops moving entirely, even at anchor. Fellow crew members snore, talk, or move around throughout the night. Watches must be maintained, meaning someone is always awake and active. Night temperatures, especially in northern waters, drop to bone-chilling levels that make deep sleep nearly impossible without shared body heat. Yet another intimacy your modern sensibilities might find challenging. Food aboard ship makes your morning porridge seem like gourmet cuisine by comparison. The lack of cooking facilities means most shipboard meals consist of dried meat, hard bread, and perhaps some cheese, all in various states of staleness or mild spoilage. Fresh water is a precious resource, strictly rationed and quickly becoming stale in wooden casks. More commonly, you drink ale or sour milk, neither particularly refreshing after hours of physical exertion in salt air. Hygiene, already a tenuous concept on land, becomes almost theoretical at sea. Fresh water is too valuable to waste on washing. Saltwater cleaning is possible, but leaves a tacky salt residue on skin and clothing that can cause chafing and sores. Your hair becomes a stiff, salt-encrusted mass. Your skin develops a crusty layer of salt, sweat, and grime. The wool clothing you wear, already scratchy when clean, becomes progressively more irritating as it accumulates bodily oils, salt, and dirt. Toilet facilities consist of the ship's side, or a bucket in truly rough conditions. The process requires balance, timing with the waves, and a complete abandonment of modesty. Miss your timing, and you might find yourself wearing what you intended to dispose of, much to the amusement of your crewmates. The psychological challenges of seafaring might exceed even the physical ones. Modern humans are accustomed to constant stimulation and entertainment. On a Viking ship, you face hours of repetitive labour punctuated by moments of terror, with little to occupy your mind between these extremes. No music beyond what the crew might sing, no books, no games except the simplest board games during rare leisure moments. The vastness of the ocean, the distance from land, the complete dependence on your vessel's integrity, these create an existential vulnerability that few modern experiences can replicate. Every creak of the hull reminds you how thin the barrier is between life and drowning. Every dark cloud on the horizon could herald a storm your ship might not weather. Every unfamiliar coastline might host hostile forces waiting to repel Viking raiders with lethal force. And if disaster does strike, if the ship capsizes, breaks apart, or simply leaks beyond the crew's ability to bail, your survival options are grim. There are no life jackets, no emergency flares, no radio to call for rescue. Viking sailors were often strong swimmers by necessity, but swimming in the North Sea or Atlantic is a temporary delay of the inevitable rather than a survival strategy. The cold water induces hypothermia within minutes, making even the strongest swimmer's efforts futile beyond short distances. By some miracle, let's say you've endured a full day of Viking seafaring without succumbing to exhaustion, injury, or the temptation to throw yourself overboard just to end the misery. Your modern body, pushed well beyond its comfortable limits, is now expected to potentially engage in the most notorious Viking activity, raiding. Because apparently, the day hasn't been challenging enough already. As the ship approaches a foreign shore, perhaps a monastery on the English coast or a trading settlement along a Frankish river, you realise that all the discomforts and exertions of the journey were merely the prelude to the main event. And if you thought rowing tested your physical limits, you're about to discover what happens when other humans actively try to ensure you don't see another sunrise. The longship's dragon-headed prow cuts through the morning mist as your vessel approaches an unfamiliar shoreline. This is it, the moment Viking raids have become infamous for throughout history. The monastery bell tolls in the distance, not as a call to prayer, but as a frantic warning. They've spotted you. Your stomach churns with a nauseating mixture of fear, exhaustion, and that questionable dried fish you choked down at dawn. Welcome to raiding, the activity that gave Vikings their fearsome reputation and would almost certainly be the end of your brief career as a Norse warrior. Hollywood has painted Viking raids as glorious choreographed affairs where muscular warriors leap dramatically from ships to engage in heroic combat. The reality? It's a chaotic, terrifying scramble that begins the moment your ship grinds against the shore. There's no graceful disembarking via convenient gangplank. You're expected to jump into knee-deep frigid water and wade ashore. Your already sodden wool clothing now completely saturated and weighing you down like a medieval wetsuit. The cold shock of the water momentarily takes your breath away, a dangerous distraction when every second counts. Your waterlogged shoes slip on smooth stones and seaweed as you struggle toward dry land. Some of your shipmates are already ahead, others behind, the carefully practiced shield wall formation from training now a distant memory in the chaos of an actual landing. Your weapons and shield, which felt unreasonably heavy during practice, now seem to weigh as much as a modern refrigerator. Your arms, already fatigued from hours of rowing, tremble under the strain. The shield's leather grip, damp with sea spray and your own nervous sweat, threatens to slip from your grasp with each stumbling step toward shore. The element of surprise, a crucial advantage in Viking raids, is entirely dependent on speed at this moment. There's a narrow window between being spotted offshore and local defenders organizing an effective response. Every second you spend floundering in the shallows or catching your breath on the beach is time for your potential victims to flee with valuables, or worse, for defenders to arm themselves and form a welcoming committee you definitely don't want to meet. Assuming you make it to dry land without drowning in 2 feet of water, a more common fate than you might imagine for armor-clad warriors. The real challenge begins. You're soaking wet, breathing hard, and now expected to run, yes, run, toward your target. This might be a monastery, a village, or a trading post, typically located some distance from the immediate shoreline. The terrain is unfamiliar and treacherous. What looks like solid ground might be boggy marsh that sucks at your feet. Dense undergrowth conceals holes and obstacles ready to twist an ankle or send you face first into the mud. All this while carrying weapons, shield, and perhaps a small sack for carrying plunder, if you live long enough to acquire any. As you approach the target, the first resistance appears. These aren't trained soldiers in most cases, but local defenders are fighting for their homes, families, and lives. A powerful motivation that makes even farmers with improvised weapons dangerous opponents. They know the terrain intimately while you're navigating it for the first time at speed, gasping for breath, with your legs still wobbly from days at sea. The first clash is nothing like the choreographed battles of film. It's a frenzy of shoving, wild strikes, screaming, and blind panic on both sides. Training helps, certainly, but the reality of combat bears little resemblance to practice sessions. The noise alone is disorienting. Metal on metal, wood splintering, men shouting in multiple languages, the wounded crying out in pain. Your modern brain, accustomed to ordered environments and clear audio cues, struggles to process the sensory overload. The smell hits next, a nauseating cocktail of blood, voided bowels, sweat, and fear. Your body instinctively wants to recoil, to flee from these primal danger signals. Vikings, conditioned from childhood to associate these smells with opportunity rather than threat, have a significant psychological advantage over your modern sensibilities. Time distorts in combat. What feels like an hour might be 30 seconds. You swing your weapon, not with the practiced technique from training, but with desperate, adrenaline-fueled movements. Your first successful strike against an opponent sends shocking vibrations up your arm. Weapons don't slice cleanly through enemies like in movies. They get stuck in bone, deflect off armor, or glance off at unexpected angles. The worst realization comes when you take your first wound. It might be minor, a cut to the forearm, a glancing blow to the shoulder, but the pain is unlike anything in your modern experience. There's no immediate medical attention, no clean bandages, certainly no antibiotics. Just searing pain that your body can't compartmentalize because it's never had to before. The sight of your own blood triggers a primal panic response that centuries of civilization have failed to eliminate. If the wound is serious, a deep cut, a broken bone, or worse, your raid is effectively over. There are no medics to evacuate you, no field hospitals waiting. Your shipmates might drag you back to the boat if they're not otherwise occupied. But combat first aid in the Viking Age consists primarily of stop the bleeding if possible and hope for the best. Infection is a near certainty for any significant wound, and without antibiotics, even minor injuries can become lethal within days. Assuming you somehow avoid debilitating injury, the raid continues. The objective isn't typically wholesale slaughter. Contrary to popular depictions, Vikings were pragmatic raiders rather than mindless berserkers. The goal is valuable goods that can be easily transported: precious metals, jewelry, religious artifacts, weapons, and sometimes people for the thrall, slave markets. Burning buildings and killing defenders happens certainly, but it's a means to an end rather than the primary purpose. This pragmatic approach doesn't make the experience any less horrific. You might find yourself herding terrified civilians, tearing religious artifacts from sacred spaces, or setting fire to buildings to create distractions. These acts, morally repugnant to modern sensibilities, are expected behavior in your temporary role as a Viking raider. The psychological trauma of participating in such activities, even in a life or death situation, would haunt a modern person indefinitely. The physical demands continue throughout the raid. There's no break, no chance to catch your breath or rest your burning muscles. You're constantly moving, fighting, carrying, watching for threats. The adrenaline that initially masked your fatigue eventually fades, leaving you shaking with exhaustion but unable to stop. Your modern body, even if physically fit by contemporary standards, lacks the specific conditioning for this sustained, varied exertion. Communication during the chaos is minimal, and primarily through shouted commands or pre-arranged signals. There's no checking in with teammates, no detailed coordination. You must somehow intuit the overall flow of the raid and your role within it, all while in a state of sensory overload and physical distress. Modern military units use sophisticated communication systems and extensive training to manage battlefield chaos. You have neither. As the raid progresses, the defenders may regroup or reinforcements might arrive. What began as a relatively one-sided assault can quickly transform into a desperate fight for survival. The tactical advantage shifts with alarming speed, and the route back to your ship, your only escape option, might suddenly be contested. There's no backup plan, no secondary extraction point, no friendly forces coming to your rescue. The order to retreat, when it comes, triggers a new kind of chaos. The disciplined approach of the initial landing dissolves into a scramble back to the ships. Those burdened with plunder move slower, creating bottlenecks. The wounded struggle to keep pace. Some are left behind, a harsh reality of Viking raiding that no one acknowledges until safely back at sea. Reaching the ship doesn't end the danger. Now you must reverse the landing process, wading through surf, climbing aboard with whatever loot or injuries you've acquired, finding your position, and preparing to row with whatever strength remains in your depleted body. All this while potentially under pursuit from angry defenders launching missiles, loose arrows, or even attempting to wade out to the ship. Once aboard, there's no immediate relief. The ship must be pushed off the beach, oars deployed, and sufficient distance gained from shore before anyone can truly relax. This often requires the most intense rowing of the journey, with tired arms and perhaps fewer rowers than you arrived with. The relief of escape mixes with the pain of exertion in a unique form of misery. Only when the shoreline recedes and immediate pursuit is no longer possible does the true reckoning begin. Injuries are assessed and treated with the limited medical knowledge available, primarily cleaning wounds with wine or seawater, both painful options, crude stitching if necessary, and simple bandaging. Broken bones might be splintered, but complex fractures often mean a lingering death from infection or impaired function for life. The plunder is quickly inventoried, partly to assess the raid's success and partly to establish who can claim what portion. Viking raiding parties had established customs for dividing spoils, with leaders taking larger shares and successful warriors earning recognition through their captured goods. As a newcomer who likely contributed minimally or negatively to the raid's success, your share would be correspondingly small. The physical aftermath hits next. As adrenaline fully subsides, your body catalogues its new collection of injuries, strains, and traumas. Muscles seize, bruises bloom, and wounds throb with each heartbeat. The same wet, cold clothing you've worn since morning now chafes against raw skin and provides minimal protection against the sea wind. There's no hot shower, no clean clothes, no soft bed to recover in, just the same hard rowing bench and another night of fitful sleep ahead. The psychological impact might be even more significant. Modern humans are not conditioned for direct, intimate violence. The sights, sounds, and actions of a raid violate deep-seated moral frameworks and social conditioning. Post-traumatic stress, a concept unknown to Vikings but all too familiar in our era, would be a near certainty for most modern people thrust into such scenarios. The nightmares, flashbacks, and moral injury would persist long after any physical wounds healed. For the Vikings surrounding you, the raid was Tuesday, a dangerous but routine activity within their cultural context. For you, it represents a fundamental break with everything your modern upbringing prepared you for. The casual violence, the acceptance of death and injury as occupational hazards, the taking of property and lives, all exist in a moral framework utterly alien to contemporary Western values. And here's the final crushing realization as your ship heads back to open water. This single raid, which has pushed you beyond every physical and psychological limit you thought you had, is not a one-time event. Viking warriors might participate in dozens of such raids each season, their bodies and minds conditioned through years of experience to withstand stresses that have left you a trembling, traumatized wreck after just one encounter. The journey home still awaits. More rowing, more exposure to the elements, more nights on hard wooden planks. And at the settlement, rather than the extended recovery your body desperately needs, there would be expectations to participate in the next expedition, perhaps within days. The cycle of preparation, voyage, violence, and return formed the rhythm of a Viking warrior's life during the raiding season, a rhythm that would quickly break anyone not born and raised in this harsh reality. So as you sit on your rowing bench, hands bleeding through makeshift bandages, muscles screaming with each stroke of the oar, surrounded by men comparing battle trophies and laughing about near-death experiences, the truth becomes undeniable. You wouldn't last a day as a Viking warrior. Your modern body lacks the conditioning. Your modern mind lacks the psychological framework. And your modern sensibilities cannot bridge the vast cultural chasm separating you from these people who appear human just like you, but who inhabit a world defined by fundamentally different rules and expectations. And we haven't even discussed what happens if your raiding party loses the fight, a fate that would make everything described so far seem like a pleasant alternative by comparison. But perhaps that's a nightmare for another bedtime story. By some miracle, you've survived the raid and returned to the settlement with your shipmates. Your body is a catalogue of new injuries. Your mind is reeling from experiences that will fuel nightmares for years to come. And yet the Viking day continues. Now you must navigate something potentially more dangerous than physical combat. Viking social dynamics, the intricate web of honor, loyalty, kinship, and status that governs Norse society is a minefield for your modern sensibilities, with consequences for missteps ranging from humiliation to exile or death. Let's start with the most fundamental aspect of Viking social structure: honor. In your modern world, honor might be an abstract concept occasionally invoked in formal settings or historical discussions. In Viking society, it's the currency that determines your worth more definitively than any material possession. Honor isn't just about personal pride. It's a public quality, constantly assessed and reassigned by the community based on your actions, words, and even your reactions to insults. Your honor is tied directly to your reputation, what the Norse called ordstyr, roughly translated as word fame. This reputation follows you everywhere, determining everything from your seating position at feasts to your prospects for marriage alliances to whether anyone will stand with you in a conflict. There's no privacy, no separation between your work persona and private life. Every action is observed, judged, and remembered by the community. For a modern person accustomed to compartmentalizing different aspects of life and maintaining privacy, this constant social surveillance is exhausting. Your casual comments, facial expressions, even your posture are all being interpreted through a cultural lens you barely understand. A gesture that seems friendly to you might be read as submissive or insulting. A joke that would land well in your office break room might be perceived as a deadly serious challenge to someone's honor. The concept of face, maintaining proper public appearance, governs nearly all social interactions. Causing someone to lose face, even accidentally, creates an obligation for them to restore their honor, often through demanding compensation or, in serious cases, physical retaliation. Your modern habit of direct communication, especially when delivering criticism or disagreement, would be perceived as deliberately shameful to the recipient, a serious social offence. Gift-giving forms another complex aspect of Viking social dynamics. Gifts aren't simple expressions of affection or celebration as in modern culture. They're binding social contracts that establish obligations between giver and receiver. Accepting a gift means acknowledging a relationship with specific expectations. Refusing a gift is a serious insult, suggesting you reject the relationship being offered. The value and nature of your reciprocal gift communicates your assessment of the other person's worth and your intentions toward them. As a newcomer to the settlement, you would be expected to present appropriate gifts to the Jarl, chieftain, and other important figures. But how would you know what's appropriate? Give too little, and you've insulted them. Give too much, and you might be seen as trying to establish dominance or create an obligation they can't comfortably fulfill. Your modern instinct to simply ask someone would itself be seen as socially inept. These are rules everyone is supposed to understand implicitly. Feasting and drinking rituals present another social minefield. The mead hall isn't just a place to eat and drink. It's the centre of political and social life, where status is displayed, alliances formed, and conflicts either resolved or escalated. Seating arrangements strictly follow social hierarchy. Sitting in the wrong place isn't just a faux pas, it's a challenge to the established order. The Jarl and most honoured warriors sit in the high seats, with status diminishing as you move further away. When drink is offered in the hall, it comes with specific rituals and expectations. Toasts aren't casual well wishes, but formal declarations, often involving oaths to gods or pledges of future action. Refusing to participate in these rituals marks you as untrustworthy or disrespectful. Drinking capacity itself can be a measure of worth, though not simple drunkenness, but rather the ability to consume substantial amounts while maintaining composure and wit. The concept of flighting, ritualized verbal dueling through exchanging insults and boasts, is particularly dangerous territory for the uninitiated. What begins as seemingly good-natured ribbing can quickly escalate to deadly serious challenges. Your modern understanding of humour and appropriate topics for jokes provides no guidance in this environment. An insult about someone's courage or honesty, which might be laughed off in your world, could be grounds for a physical duel in Viking society. Speaking of duels, the concept of holmgang, a formal combat to resolve disputes, remains a legitimate and sometimes required method of conflict resolution. Refusing such a challenge results in automatic social death. You're declared nuddinga, a person without honour, and effectively outcast. Your modern instinct to suggest talking through a problem or seeking third-party mediation might itself be seen as cowardly evasion of responsibility. Family and kinship obligations form another complex aspect of Viking social dynamics. Your loyalty to family isn't just expected, it's legally and socially mandated. Blood feuds, ongoing cycles of revenge killings between families, can span generations, with each new member inheriting the obligation to avenge relatives or defend family honour. Your modern concept of individual choice and personal responsibility doesn't align with a society where your family's actions directly impact your own honour and standing. Gender roles, while more flexible than in some historical societies, still follow distinct patterns that might conflict with your contemporary values. Men are expected to display courage, strength, and skill in combat. Women hold significant power within the household and in certain religious contexts, but are also expected to uphold family honour through appropriate behaviour. Crossing these gender boundaries without the exceptional status that some historical figures managed to achieve would mark you as dishonourable or urgy unmanliness, a deadly serious insult for men. Religion permeates every aspect of Viking social life, with no concept of separation between spiritual and secular realms. The gods are not distant figures but active participants in daily affairs, requiring proper acknowledgement and offerings. Failing to show appropriate respect to deities or participating incorrectly in rituals marks you as either stupid or deliberately disrespectful. neither being a reputation you want in a community where social standing determines survival. Legal disputes follow procedures entirely foreign to your understanding of justice. There are no police, no impartial judges in the modern sense. The thing, assembly, serves as a court where cases are decided largely based on the social standing of the participants and their ability to gather oath helpers, people willing to swear to their version of events or character. Truth in the objective sense matters less than who has the stronger social network and more compelling presentation. For serious offences, outlawry remains the ultimate punishment, being declared outside the protection of law, meaning anyone can kill you without consequence, and offering you aid becomes a crime. There's no appeals process, no rehabilitation program, no prison sentence to serve before rejoining society. Once declared outlaw, your only options are exile or death. The concept of personal space differs dramatically from modern expectations. Longhouses are communal dwellings where privacy is minimal. Conversations are often conducted at close distances that would feel uncomfortably intimate by contemporary Western standards. Physical contact between same-sex friends, clasping arms, embracing, even sharing sleeping spaces for warmth, is normal and expected, while showing similar familiarity with the wrong person could be interpreted as a serious overstep. Emotional expression follows different rules as well. Stoicism in the face of physical pain or personal loss is highly valued, particularly for men. Yet certain emotions, particularly anger over insults to honor, are expected to be displayed openly and addressed directly. Your modern tendency toward conflict avoidance would be read as weakness, while your comfort with expressing certain emotions might be seen as inappropriate or manipulative. Humor, that seemingly universal human trait, operates on entirely different principles. Practical jokes that cause physical discomfort or temporary humiliation are common bonding mechanisms, especially among warriors. Refusing to be a good sport about being the target or failing to participate when others are targeted marks you as separate from the group. Yet jokes about certain topics, a man's courage, a woman's fidelity, someone's honesty, can quickly cross from humour into deadly serious territory. The concept of time itself differs from your modern understanding. Viking society doesn't operate on precise schedules, but rather on seasonal rhythms and natural daylight. Appointments aren't set for specific hours, but for general times of day or in relation to other activities. This flexibility, comfortable within an agricultural and raiding society, would feel chaotically unpredictable to your schedule-oriented modern mind. Perhaps most fundamentally challenging is the Viking attitude toward death and mortality. Death in battle isn't just accepted, but glorified as the ideal end for a warrior. Dying of old age or illness could be seen as somewhat shameful, a straw death unworthy of remembrance in saga. This comfort with violence and mortality, this acceptance of death as an ever-present possibility rather than a distant abstraction, creates a psychological framework entirely foreign to modern Western sensibilities. As you attempt to navigate these social complexities, your shipmates watch your every move, interpreting your modern behaviours through their cultural lens. Your attempts at privacy might be read as secretive or suspicious. Your discomfort with violence could mark you as cowardly. Your direct questions about social customs might be seen as deliberately obtuse or mocking. Even your body language, eye contact, posture, hand positions, communicates messages you don't intend to a society reading an entirely different set of signals. The psychological toll of this constant social vigilance, this perpetual fear of committing some unintentional offence with serious consequences, would wear down even the most socially adept modern person. The cognitive load of operating in a society whose unwritten rules you don't instinctively understand creates a state of constant stress and uncertainty. There's no handbook, no orientation session, no cultural sensitivity training to prepare you. And unlike physical challenges, which might become marginally easier as your body adapts, these social challenges would likely grow more difficult over time. Initial mistakes might be partially excused due to your obvious foreignness, but that grace period would quickly expire. As days turn to weeks, expectations for proper behavior would increase, while your psychological reserves for maintaining this constant vigilance would diminish. So even if your modern body somehow adapted to the physical demands of Viking life, the labor, the combat, the harsh living conditions, your modern mind would likely crumble under the social pressures long before you could truly integrate into the community. The constant stress of navigating an alien social landscape with life or death consequences for missteps would eventually break even the most resilient contemporary person. And we haven't even discussed what happens when winter arrives, food stores run low, or disease sweeps through the settlement. Challenges that would test even those fully integrated into the social support systems you've failed to successfully navigate. But perhaps those are tales for another night, assuming you've survived the social dynamics long enough to worry about such future concerns. As you navigate the treacherous waters of Viking social dynamics, there's another dimension of Norse life that would prove equally challenging to your modern sensibilities: religious practices. Viking spirituality wasn't a compartmentalized Sunday morning activity or a private, personal belief system. It was an all-encompassing worldview that permeated every aspect of daily life, from the most mundane household tasks to the bloodiest battlefield encounters. And your inability to authentically participate in these practices would mark you as an outsider more definitively than any physical shortcoming. The Norse religious world was populated by a complex pantheon of gods, goddesses, giants, elves, dwarves, and other supernatural beings who were believed to directly influence human affairs. This wasn't abstract theology. Vikings perceived these entities as active participants in the world, capable of bringing fortune or disaster depending on how they were treated. The boundary between the natural and supernatural was permeable, with omens and signs from the gods appearing in everything from weather patterns to animal behavior to the pattern of spilled liquid. Your modern, likely secular or monotheistic worldview provides no framework for genuinely engaging with this reality. Even if you intellectually understand Norse mythology, there's a vast difference between academic knowledge and the bone-deep belief that Thor's hammer protects you during thunderstorms, or that Odin might be testing you through a seemingly random encounter with a stranger. This disconnect would be immediately apparent to those around you, marking you as either impious or dangerously ignorant of how the world functions. The daily rhythm of Viking life included regular religious observances that would feel alien to your modern sensibilities. Morning might begin with a small offering to the household gods, perhaps a splash of ale or a morsel of food set aside before your own breakfast. Crossing certain thresholds, beginning important work, or embarking on journeys all called for specific invocations or gestures. These weren't optional rituals, but essential spiritual safeguards, as natural to Vikings as looking both ways before crossing a street is to you. Your inevitable mistakes in these observances wouldn't just be social faux pas, they would be interpreted as dangerous spiritual negligence that could bring divine disfavor upon the entire community. Forget to make the proper sign when passing a sacred grove. You've just risked angering the land spirits, fail to participate correctly in a seasonal blessing. You're potentially endangering the harvest for everyone. Your modern concept of religious tolerance or personal choice has no place in a world where spiritual practices are communal survival strategies. The physical spaces of Viking religious life would challenge your modern expectations as well. While some larger settlements had dedicated temples, show off, many religious ceremonies took place in the hall of the chieftain or outdoors at sacred sites. These weren't clearly marked with religious symbols or set apart from secular spaces. The sacred permeated the ordinary world with certain trees, rocks, crossroads, and bodies of water holding special significance that would be invisible to your untrained eye. Blot, sacrificial ceremonies formed the cornerstone of communal religious practice, occurring at key seasonal points throughout the year. These weren't symbolic rituals, but involved the actual sacrifice of animals, and in some historical accounts, occasionally humans, though the frequency and nature of such practices remain debated by scholars. The blood of sacrificial animals was collected in vessels and then sprinkled on participants, idols, and sacred spaces using specialized twigs or brushes. Your modern squeamishness about blood, death, and raw viscera would be immediately apparent and interpreted as weakness or impiety. The communal consumption of sacrificial meat that followed these ceremonies wasn't just a meal, but a sacred sharing in the blessing. Your hesitation to participate fully, to be sprinkled with blood, to eat meat blessed in ways your modern sensibilities find disturbing, would create an unbridgeable spiritual gap between you and the community. Seder, a form of Norse magic associated particularly with foreseeing the future and influencing minds, would present another aspect of Viking spirituality entirely foreign to your modern framework. These practices, often associated with women or men willing to cross traditional gender boundaries with complex social implications, involved trance states, chanting, and rituals that modern people might associate with shamanic practices. Your inability to perceive or engage with the spiritual realities these rituals addressed would mark you as spiritually blind. The concept of fate, embodied in the Norns who weave the destinies of gods and humans alike, permeated Viking consciousness in ways difficult for modern individuals to fully comprehend. Your contemporary emphasis on personal choice, agency, and self-determination would clash fundamentally with the Norse understanding that certain aspects of life are fixed by fate, weird, while others remain within the realm of human influence. This philosophical disconnect would colour every decision you make, every risk you evaluate, in ways obvious to those around you. Funeral practices would perhaps present the most shocking contrast to your modern sensibilities. Viking funerals varied by region and status, but commonly involved either cremation or inhumation, burial with grave goods, possessions the deceased would need in the afterlife. High-status individuals might be buried in ships or ship-shaped stone settings. Some evidence suggests that human sacrifices occasionally accompanied the funerals of particularly important figures, with slaves or servants killed to serve their master in the next world. Your horror at these practices would be impossible to conceal, yet refusing to participate appropriately in funeral rites would be one of the most serious social and religious transgressions possible. The proper treatment of the dead wasn't just about respect, but about ensuring they successfully transitioned to the afterlife rather than remaining to trouble the living. Your modern conception of death as a purely biological process, divorced from spiritual transition, would be not just foreign, but potentially dangerous in Viking understanding. The afterlife itself was conceived differently than in most modern religious frameworks. There was no single destination for all souls, but different realms depending on how one lived and died. Warriors who died in battle might be chosen by Odin's Valkyries for Valhalla or by Freyja for Folkvanga, while those who died of illness or old age generally went to hell, not a place of punishment as in Christian conception, but simply the realm of the dead. This understanding fundamentally shaped attitudes toward life, death, and what constituted a good end. Your modern fear of death, your instinctive desire to avoid violence and extend life at almost any cost, would be incomprehensible in a culture where dying well, preferably in battle for men, was more important than living long. This fundamental difference in how you value and perceive mortality would create a gulf between you and Viking society that no amount of cultural adaptation could fully bridge. The Norse calendar, organised around religious festivals and seasonal changes rather than arbitrary numerical dates, would disorient your modern time sense. Major celebrations included winter nights, beginning of winter, Yule, midwinter, Disablot for female deities and ancestors, and Sigrablot, victory sacrifice at the beginning of the raiding season. Each came with specific rituals, taboos, and expectations that would be second nature to Vikings, but completely foreign to you. Even language itself was infused with religious significance. Oaths sworn by gods or on objects like rings or weapons weren't just emphatic statements, but binding spiritual contracts with supernatural witnesses. Breaking such oaths wasn't simply dishonest, but invited divine punishment. Your modern casual relationship with language, the white lies, exaggerations, and non-binding promises that oil the wheels of contemporary social interaction would be dangerous in a world where words carried literal spiritual power. Divination practices, reading omens in natural phenomena, casting runes, or interpreting dreams, guided major decisions from when to plant crops to when to launch raids. These weren't superstitions to Vikings, but practical methods for navigating an uncertain world with divine guidance. Your inability to perceive or interpret these signs, your instinctive skepticism toward such practices, would mark you as spiritually blind and potentially dangerous to have involved in important community decisions. Perhaps most alien to your modern sensibilities would be the blurred line between religious practice and what we might now categorize as mental health experiences. Certain altered states of consciousness, battle frenzy, berserker or ulfidnar, prophetic visions or communion with spirits, were interpreted as divine possession or influence rather than psychological phenomena. Your modern tendency to pathologize such experiences would be not just incorrect, but potentially blasphemous in Viking understanding. The gendered aspects of Norse religion would challenge contemporary values as well. While women played vital roles as priestesses, vulva, and keepers of certain religious knowledge, and men could engage in practices like Seder that crossed gender boundaries, though with social consequences, religious roles and practices were not uniformly accessible regardless of gender. Your modern expectations of gender equality would find no purchase in a spiritual system where certain deities and practices were specifically associated with particular genders. Even artistic expression carried religious significance beyond aesthetic value. The intricate animal and knot designs that decorated everything from wooden posts to metal jewelry weren't just decorative, but contained spiritual symbolism and protective properties. The creation of such art wasn't merely craft, but a form of spiritual practice, with patterns believed to bind or ward off harmful forces. Your appreciation of these designs would be shallow compared to those who understood their deeper spiritual functions. As days passed in your Viking life, this religious disconnect would become increasingly problematic. Initial mistakes might be attributed to foreign origins, but continued failure to properly engage with the spiritual world would eventually mark you as dangerously impious. In a society where community survival was believed to depend on maintaining proper relationships with divine powers, someone who couldn't or wouldn't participate correctly in religious observances was a liability no settlement could afford. And here lies perhaps the most fundamental reason you wouldn't last a day as a Viking warrior. Beyond the physical hardships, beyond the social complexities, your modern mind simply cannot authentically inhabit the Norse religious worldview. You might go through the motions of rituals, might intellectually understand the mythology, but you cannot truly believe in Odin's ravens bringing him news of your deeds or feel genuine concern about the approaching Ragnarok. This spiritual disconnect would ultimately prove more insurmountable than any physical challenge the Viking Age could present. Beyond the religious practices that would alienate your modern mind, there are the fundamental survival challenges of Viking life that would likely prove fatal to even the hardiest contemporary human. We've touched on many difficulties throughout our journey through a Viking day, but now let's focus specifically on the environmental and physical threats that would quickly overwhelm your modern defenses and adaptations. Let's start with the most basic survival challenge: the climate. The Scandinavian environment during the Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 CE, was harsh even for those born and raised within it. The tail end of the medieval warm period meant conditions were slightly milder than in previous centuries, but milder in this context still means brutally cold winters, short growing seasons, and the constant threat of starvation if summer harvests failed. Your modern body, accustomed to climate-controlled environments maintaining a perfect 70 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, would experience the Viking climate as a relentless assault. Winter temperatures in coastal Norway or Sweden regularly plunge well below freezing for months at a time. Without central heating, your only warmth comes from hearth fires, body heat from others in the longhouse, and whatever layers of wool and fur you can pile onto your shivering frame. Frostbite and hypothermia aren't rare medical emergencies in this environment. They're constant winter companions that claim fingers, toes, ears, and lives every year. The Vikings developed generations of physical adaptations to their climate: higher metabolic rates, more efficient circulation to extremities, and bodies that efficiently store fat for insulation and energy reserves. Your body, shaped by modern comforts, lacks these adaptations and would burn through its energy reserves at an alarming rate just trying to maintain core temperature. Even sleep becomes a survival challenge in winter. The longhouse, while offering protection from wind and precipitation, isn't insulated by modern standards. The temperature inside drops precipitously once the hearth fire dims overnight. Vikings slept in family groups partly for warmth, often fully clothed and covered with furs and woolen blankets. Your modern sleep patterns, accustomed to consistent temperatures and private sleeping arrangements, would be shattered by the cold, the noise of others, and the constant discomfort. Summer brings different but equally challenging conditions. The famous midnight sun of Scandinavian summers means extended daylight that disrupts sleep cycles. Your circadian rhythm, already confused by the lack of artificial lighting in winter, would struggle to adapt to summer's nearly constant light. Sleep deprivation quickly impairs judgment, coordination, and immune function, none of which you can afford to compromise in an environment already testing your survival limits. Insects present another warm weather torment. Without modern repellents, mosquitoes and biting flies turn summer evenings into itchy misery. These aren't just annoyances, they're disease vectors and sources of potentially infected wounds when scratched with dirty fingernails. Vikings developed some natural repellents using smoke and certain plants, but their effectiveness pales in comparison to modern DEET-based products. Your modern skin, never having built up tolerance to these constant assaults, would become a landscape of inflamed welts and sores. The nutritional challenges of Viking life would quickly undermine your health, even if you managed to choke down the unfamiliar foods. The Viking diet, while more varied than some medieval European cuisines, still lacked many essential nutrients during certain seasons. Vitamin C deficiency, scurvy, was a winter reality, with fresh fruits and vegetables unavailable for months. Dental issues from the coarse, often gritty food would progress from painful annoyances to life-threatening infections without modern dentistry. Your modern digestive system, accustomed to purified water and pasteurized foods, would rebel against Viking fare. Parasitic infections from undercooked meat, contaminated water, or poor food storage were common. Intestinal parasites like tapeworms, roundworms, and flukes were so prevalent that archaeological examinations of Viking latrines show they were nearly universal. These unwelcome gut inhabitants cause chronic malnutrition by stealing nutrients before your body can absorb them, creating a vicious cycle of weakness and susceptibility to other illnesses. Speaking of illness, the lack of antibiotics transforms minor injuries into potential death sentences. That blister on your heel from your ill-fitting leather shoes. If it becomes infected, you have nothing but honey, alcoholic beverages, or various herbal poultices to treat it, none of which can match the infection-fighting power of modern antibiotics. A simple cut from a cooking knife or woodworking tool could lead to blood poisoning that would have you delirious with fever within days. Communicable diseases moved differently in Viking communities than in our modern world. Without understanding germ theory, concepts like quarantine and sanitation were limited. Common childhood diseases that modern people survive with minimal complications, measles, mumps, chickenpox, could be deadly in a population with different immune backgrounds and no access to supportive medical care. Your modern immune system, while robust against the diseases of your time, might have no defense against the specific pathogens of the Viking era. Chronic conditions that are manageable inconveniences in the modern world become debilitating or fatal in Viking society. Asthma, good luck managing an attack without inhalers when smoke fills the longhouse. Diabetes? Insulin won't be discovered for another 1,000 years. Food allergies? There's no concept of allergen labeling, and explaining your peanut sensitivity to a Viking would be an exercise in futility. Even common conditions like nearsightedness become serious disabilities when there are no optometrists to prescribe corrective lenses. Pregnancy and childbirth, already dangerous in pre-modern societies, had mortality rates that would horrify contemporary parents. Complications that would warrant immediate C-sections in modern hospitals became protracted death sentences for both mother and child. Your modern expectations of prenatal care, pain management during labour, and postpartum recovery would find no purchase in Viking midwifery practices, effective though they were for their time. Injuries that modern emergency medicine routinely repairs were life-altering or fatal in Viking society. A broken leg might heal, but without proper setting and physical therapy, you'd likely walk with a permanent limp, assuming you could walk at all. Head injuries, common in both daily life and combat, had no treatment beyond basic wound care and hope. Internal injuries remained mysterious and largely untreatable, their symptoms observed, but their causes not understood. The psychological challenges of Viking survival extend beyond the social and religious disconnects we've already discussed. Modern humans are accustomed to a level of safety and predictability that simply didn't exist in the Viking world. The constant background stress of potential raids, crop failures, disease outbreaks, or accidents creates a psychological burden that few contemporary people have experienced outside of active war zones or extreme poverty. This chronic stress affects physical health through well-documented pathways: compromised immune function, digestive issues, cardiovascular strain, and impaired cognitive function. Your modern nervous system, never having developed the resilience that comes from lifelong exposure to these conditions, would likely respond with anxiety, depression, or other psychological manifestations that would further impair your ability to function in Viking society. Sleep deprivation, already mentioned in relation to climate challenges, compounds these psychological effects. Modern research has established the critical importance of regular, quality sleep for mental health and cognitive function. The Viking sleep environment, shared spaces, uncomfortable bedding, temperature extremes, and constant noise would ensure you never experience the restorative sleep your modern brain requires to function optimally. The sensory landscape of Viking life would overwhelm modern senses accustomed to different stimuli. The constant smoke from hearth fires irritates eyes and lungs while permanently scenting clothing and hair. The smells of unwashed bodies, animal pens, food storage, and waste disposal create an olfactory environment that your modern nose would never fully acclimate to. The cacophony of a working settlement, hammering, chopping, animals, children, arguments, provides no respite for ears accustomed to being able to control their auditory environment. Even the visual landscape presents challenges. Without artificial lighting, nights are profoundly dark in ways few modern humans have experienced. Your eyes, accustomed to being able to banish darkness at the flip of a switch, would struggle to develop the night vision that Vikings took for granted. Conversely, working outdoors in snow conditions without sunglasses would expose you to snow blindness, a painful corneal inflammation from UV exposure reflected off snow. The cumulative effect of these survival challenges creates a physical and psychological burden that would quickly overwhelm even the most adaptable modern human. Each individual hardship, the cold, the food, the hygiene issues, the medical concerns, might be survivable with sufficient determination. But combined, they create a perfect storm of biological and psychological stress that your modern body and mind simply aren't equipped to withstand. And we haven't even addressed the most obvious survival threat: violence. Whether from raids by other groups, conflicts within the community, or the organised warfare that characterised much of the Viking Age, the threat of violent death or injury was a constant reality. Modern humans from peaceful societies have no psychological framework for living with this level of threat, no ingrained reflexes for responding to sudden violence, no emotional calluses built up from witnessing bloodshed from an early age. The final, perhaps most insurmountable survival challenge is the knowledge gap. Vikings possessed generations of accumulated practical wisdom about their environment: which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which were deadly, how to predict weather from subtle signs, how to navigate without instruments, how to craft and repair essential tools. This knowledge wasn't written in convenient manuals, but passed through direct instruction and observation from childhood. Your modern education, however advanced in abstract or technological subjects, leaves you functionally illiterate in the practical skills that Viking children mastered by age 10. So, as night falls on your first day as a Viking warrior, assuming you've somehow survived the physical exertions, social missteps, religious offences, and environmental challenges we've discussed, you find yourself facing the sobering reality that tomorrow will bring all these same challenges, again, with the added burden of accumulated fatigue, developing infections, and deepening social isolation. The modern comforts and protections you took for granted, from antibiotics to zoning laws that separate living spaces from waste disposal, reveal themselves not as luxuries but as the fragile barriers that have allowed humans with essentially the same biology as Vikings to survive in unprecedented numbers and comfort. The truth is, you wouldn't last a day as a Viking warrior, not because you're particularly weak or incompetent by modern standards, but because modern humans and Viking-age humans, while genetically nearly identical, inhabit radically different physical, social, and psychological landscapes. The adaptations, physical, mental, and cultural, that allow you to thrive in your world would become active liabilities in theirs, and their hardiness, which might seem like superior strength or resilience, is simply the result of lifelong adaptation to conditions you've never had to face. Perhaps the most humbling realization as you drift into an uncomfortable sleep on your first and likely last night in Viking society is that they would fare just as poorly in your world as you have in theirs. The Viking warrior who could row for hours, fight fearlessly, and navigate by the stars would be equally lost trying to navigate subway systems, office politics, or smartphone settings. Human adaptability is remarkable but specific. We excel in the environments we've trained for and flounder in those we haven't. So, as you pull your itchy wool blanket tighter against the night chill, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a settlement preparing for sleep, you might find some comfort in this thought. Your failure to thrive in this world isn't personal inadequacy, but simply the natural result of being perfectly adapted to a different time and place. The very comforts and technologies that would make you seem soft and unprepared to Vikings are the products of human ingenuity that would eventually transform the harsh world they take for granted. But that philosophical consolation will have to sustain you through a night of discomfort, uncertainty, and the growing realization that your chances of seeing another sunset in this world are vanishingly small. Because tomorrow brings new challenges, new opportunities for failure, and the continuing reality that you, modern time traveller, simply weren't built for this life. And so we come to the end of our journey through a day in the life of a Viking warrior, a journey that, for most modern humans, would likely end somewhere between the morning hygiene routine and the first combat training session. We've explored the physical hardships, the social complexities, the religious disconnects, and the survival challenges that would quickly overwhelm even the most adaptable contemporary person. But what does this historical thought experiment really tell us about ourselves and the people who inhabited the Viking Age? Perhaps the most important realization is that human adaptability is both remarkable and highly specific. The Vikings weren't superhuman. They were people with essentially the same biology as you and me. What made them capable of enduring conditions that would break most of us wasn't some genetic superiority, but the slow, generational process of adaptation to their environment. From childhood, their bodies and minds were shaped by the very challenges that would seem insurmountable to us. The cold, the physical labor, the constant proximity to violence and death. This isn't to romanticize Viking life or suggest they enjoyed the hardships they endured. They simply didn't know any alternative. The comforts we take for granted, climate control, abundant food, medical care, physical safety, weren't even conceivable fantasies to most people of the Viking Age. They worked within the constraints of their reality, developing cultural practices, technologies, and physical adaptations that allowed them to not just survive, but sometimes thrive in conditions we would find unbearable. Conversely, a Viking transported to our time would likely find many aspects of modern life equally bewildering and challenging. Imagine a Norse warrior trying to navigate the complexities of digital technology, corporate hierarchies, or contemporary social norms. The very skills that made them successful in their world, physical strength, comfort with violence, direct communication styles, might become liabilities in ours. They would be as out of place in our shopping malls and office buildings as we would be in their longhouses and raiding ships. This perspective offers a useful corrective to both the romanticization and the demonization of Viking culture that pervades popular media. The Norse weren't noble savages living in harmony with nature, nor were they uniquely bloodthirsty barbarians. They were humans responding to their environment with the tools, knowledge, and cultural frameworks available to them. Their raids and conquests, while brutal by our standards, were logical extensions of a world where resources were scarce and strength often determined survival. There's also something humbling in recognizing how dependent we modern humans are on the infrastructures and technologies that separate us from the physical realities of survival. Most of us don't know how to grow food, build shelter, make clothing, or defend ourselves without the support of complex systems we barely understand. Our specialized knowledge, whether coding software, performing surgery, or analyzing financial markets, would be worthless in a world where immediate physical needs dominate daily existence. Yet there's also something to celebrate in this contrast. The very comforts and protections that would make us seem soft and unprepared to Vikings are the products of human ingenuity accumulated over centuries. We've transformed our environment so thoroughly that many of the challenges that dominated human existence for millennia, starvation, exposure, endemic violence, are now exceptional rather than expected conditions for many, though certainly not all, people around the world. The distance between us and the Vikings isn't just measured in years, but in fundamental shifts in how humans relate to their environment, to each other, and to the concept of survival itself. Our modern discomfort with violence, our expectation of physical safety, our horror at preventable suffering. These aren't weaknesses, but the hard-won luxuries of societies that have managed to push back against the harshest realities of human existence. So as you lie in your comfortable bed tonight, perhaps scrolling through your phone before sleep, take a moment to appreciate the countless innovations and social developments that separate you from that Viking sleeping platform with its scratchy wool blanket and ever-present parasites. The fact that you wouldn't last a day as a Viking warrior isn't a personal failing. It's a testament to how thoroughly we've transformed human experience in the intervening centuries. And perhaps, in that moment of appreciation, spare a thought for the people who inhabited that harsh world of 1,000 years ago. They weren't so different from us in their basic hopes, fears, and needs. They loved their children, celebrated with their communities, created art and poetry, and sought meaning in their existence just as we do. They simply did it under conditions that most of us, cocooned in our modern comforts, can barely imagine. The Vikings' resilience, their ability to not just survive, but create a rich culture under such challenging conditions, deserves our respect even as we acknowledge the aspects of their society we've rightfully left behind. Their saga reminds us of both human adaptability and the real progress we've made. Progress that allows us the luxury of exploring their world through stories rather than experiencing it firsthand. Because let's be honest, that's exactly where most of us prefer to encounter the Viking Age, through the safe distance of history books, museum exhibits, and yes, bedtime stories like this one. We can romanticize their adventures, admire their craftsmanship, and even play at being Vikings in reenactments or video games. But few of us would truly wish to trade our modern lives for theirs, even for a single day. And that's perfectly fine. Our ancestors didn't endure hardships, develop technologies, and build civilizations so that we could voluntarily return to their conditions. They did it hoping their children and grandchildren might have easier, safer, more comfortable lives than they did. A hope that connects us directly to those long ago Vikings, even as the details of our daily existence would be unrecognizable to them. So as we end our journey through this hypothetical day in Viking life, perhaps the most valuable takeaway isn't just that you wouldn't last a day as a Viking warrior. It's understanding why you wouldn't and appreciating the long human story that created that distance between their world and ours. Sleep well, modern time traveler. Your bed is soft, your room is warm, and no one is going to wake you before dawn to row a longship through freezing waters. And that, by any reasonable measure, is progress worth celebrating. If you enjoyed this historical reality check, let me know in the comments what other time periods or lifestyles you'd like to explore in future episodes. Would you fare better as a Roman legionnaire, a medieval knight, a pioneer on the American frontier? Each historical context presents its own unique challenges for our modern bodies and minds. Challenges we can fortunately explore from the comfort of our very unhistorical lives. Until next time, remember to appreciate the modern miracles we take for granted, from indoor plumbing to antibiotics to not having to check your shoes for spiders every morning. History is a fascinating place to visit in our imaginations, but as tonight's journey has shown, you probably wouldn't want to live there, especially not as a Viking warrior, even for a single day.